Future Quest Incorporated was originally established in 1985 and is a national consulting firm that specializes in educational planning and college placement services tailored primarily to college-bound high school students, your students. And Dr. Azazi, he is a national leader and public speaker in educational advising. And he has over 40 years of educational planning and consulting experience. Over 40 years, parents. Dr. Azazi has worked extensively with first-generation college students, as well as a diverse range of distinguished corporations, businesses, and nonprofit entities. Some of his former clients include the Boys Choir of Harlem, New Jersey Nets basketball academic camp, Solomon Brothers Incorporated, I Have a Dream Foundation, and Prudential Securities Adopt a School program. Amongst those few, those are just a few of the ones. Most recently, Dr. Azize has been involved with designing and implementing college advising programs for charter schools right here in Washington, D.C. And during the summers, he serves as the assistant director for the MS Square program at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. Dr. Azazi received his doctorate in education from Harvard University. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Azazi.
Thank you very much for the Tuan. That's very kind of you. But I also want you guys to know that I received my education and my undergraduate degree from Howard University.
That's right.
And I was once interviewed, and the gentleman that interviewed me said, "Oh," he said, "you have some wonderful education. You went to Howard, you went to Tufts, and you went to Harvard." He said, "You must have received great education at Tufts and Harvard." I said, "No, I received a great education at Howard." So we must be very clear. I mean, there was nothing wrong with Tufts, and there was nothing wrong with Harvard, but the education actually started here in 1968 before you guys were born. I graduated from Howard University in 1972. Actually, I'm a private guidance counselor. So all of you guys have kids that go to high school, you have guidance counselors there. And unfortunately, a lot of the guidance counselors today are inundated with multiple problems and multiple tasks. They're wonderful people, they love children. But when I was a guidance counselor, I never had to serve lunch duty. When I was a guidance counselor, I never had to work in the hallways when students were changing classes. When I was a guidance counselor, I had a lot of support service. So it was easy for me to really help the children realize their dreams and aspirations in earnest, without interruption. So I have a lot of respect for my colleagues who work in schools today. But I will say this, because they're so inundated with multiple problems, they really cannot serve our children to the extent that they want to serve our children, because they're really involved with a lot of tasks that, in my opinion, they should not be involved in. And I've shared this with principals and heads of schools with whom I have professional relationships. So that being said, I think it's important that you guys become the entrepreneurs of your child's education. Make sure that you know what questions to ask and what answers to look for, when to ask those questions, and of whom. So that's my little pitch for counselors. I'm not dissing guidance counselors. I'm just saying that they have a lot of weight on their shoulder. Today we're going to have an interactive exercise called Who Gets In and Why. I think it's important for us to think about colleges from the perspective of someone who works at an institution. Quite naturally, when we are visiting colleges or when we're thinking about colleges for our students, we think about them as consumers. There's nothing wrong with that. But today I would like to engage you in a paradigm shift. I want to ask you, assume that you are actually an admissions officer or a vice president of enrollment management at a university or a dean of admissions, and you're bringing in a class of students. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background information, and then we're going to have some case studies, and then you guys will simulate an admissions process And then at the end of that, I'll tell you why the 2 students who were admitted. And then we'll leave it open for some questions, okay? Okay, like most corporations, they all have institutional needs. Educational institutions today are run like businesses. And all businesses have institutional needs. Some of those needs are macro level needs, and some of those needs are micro level needs. For example, the president has mandated that over the next 5 years, we want to increase the enrollment of first-generation students. Next 5 years, we want to increase the enrollment of paying customers. We want to be able to offer fewer loans and more need-based grants to middle-class students. Those are macro-level needs. A micro-level need could be the quarterback of the football team is graduating. We have to replace that quarterback. The violinist's first chair is graduating this year. We have to replace the violinist's first chair. As the Dean of Admissions, when you're putting together that class, these mandates are not negotiable. The president has mandated that we have these macro-level needs and these micro-level needs to be satisfied. All universities have macro-level needs, they all have micro-level needs. So when they're building the class, the admissions officers have to pay attention to that. So sometimes you might hear students in the hallway saying, I don't know how Stephen got into Howard or Spelman or Morehouse or University of Chicago. My GPA was better than his GPA. Well, he may have been a quarterback, or he may have played a violin. He may have satisfied a particular need that the university has. Selective colleges also pay attention to the following. Now, occasionally in my presentation, I will use the word selective colleges or competitive colleges. And I want to operationalize that definition for you so that you will know how I define a competitive college or a selective college. A selective college would be a college that receives more qualified applicants than they can accept. So for example, 5 years ago, a friend of mine who was Dean of Admissions at Spelman said that for every 15 applications, they chose 1 woman. That's competitive. So when you think of a competitive college or a selective college, at least from my perspective, it's a school that routinely receives more qualified applicants than it can receive. That would include Howard University. They also pay attention to the cognitive variables, non-cognitive variables, personal attributes, when they're putting together what we call a holistic review of the application. Of course, they're concerned with the GPA, the class rank. Some of your kids will go to schools that do not rank. Don't worry about that. If it's a small graduating class, it doesn't make sense for them to rank. If you only have 100 kids in the class, statistically, it's not wise to rank them. If you have 500 kids in the class, it does make sense to rank. So what the college will ask, they will say, if you don't rank, could you please give us the top, tell us whether the student falls in the top 10 or the top quarter of the class. So they will have to aggregate them in some way so that the college will know how they fare in relationship to the other students in their class. Of course, they're interested in testing, although it's important for us to realize that there are some very competitive schools today that are test optional. They're called test optional schools, which means you can either submit your SAT or your ACT, or you don't have to. Non-cognitive variables, essays, recommendations, extracurricular activities. This program is an extracurricular activity. Community service, very, very important. And of course, some colleges do require the interview. Some colleges will recommend the interview. In this business, if they recommend it, that's the password to do it. Some colleges will have alumni interviews. So if your student is applying to Wesleyan in Connecticut, he or she will not have to travel to Middletown, Connecticut. There may be someone in this community, and there will definitely be someone in the DMV area that has attended Wesleyan, and that person would probably meet with your son and or daughter at Starbucks. They will interview them. They will send the evaluation to Wesleyan. We call those alumni interviews. Personal attributes also play a part in the decisions when selective colleges are using a holistic approach in evaluating your child's application. Resilience is very, very important. As a guidance counselor, there were some students with whom I worked over the years, and some students with whom I still work as an independent counselor. They come from some challenging backgrounds, and I'm always amazed at how resilient they are. And then I have some other students who are not as resilient. In the real world, people applaud resilience, particularly in higher education. Creativity, obviously, when we're looking for, or when colleges are looking for students to fill their freshman class, they're looking for creativity. Leadership, independent thinkers, risk takers, inventors. Independent thinkers, a lot of times when I'm talking about this with audiences, I want to drive home the point that this is where we have students who think outside the box. Most of us, including myself, when I was an adolescent, I thought the way adolescents thought. I dressed the way adolescents dressed. I talked the way adolescents talk. But occasionally you will run across a student who is an independent thinker. She thinks outside the box. Generally, in the admissions application process, that student has the potential of receiving more points and being more attractive to an institution. Okay, the interactive exercise today will focus on George Washington University. At different points of the process, you will all be asked to admit 2 students out of the 6 cases. This is a typical profile for students who are admitted to George Washington University. As a sidebar, George Washington University is also a test optional school. Though I think most of these kids that apply to the school, they submitted their SAT scores. One should not have submitted his SAT scores, but he forgot and submitted them. The cases that you will be looking at, these are students with whom I work. I mean, these are live cases. So this gives you an idea of the profile. Of course, the ACT, the highest score is 36. SAT Math, the highest score is 800. The new SAT, evidence-based reading and writing, the highest score is 800. You can see the number that have applied, and the ones that were admitted, and the ones that were enrolled. So it's a pretty competitive school. Academic requirements. For most competitive colleges, they want, of course, 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of social studies, and 3 to 4 years of the same foreign language. Sometimes this profile can be negotiated, but if a student comes to me and says, Dr. Azeze, I've already had 3 years of Spanish. I don't want to take a 4th year of Spanish. My question usually is, what do you plan to take in lieu of that? So in some ways I'm a traditionalist, but I'm not always a traditionalist. I mean, as long as the student can argue what he's or what she is going to include in place of that 5th academic class, I'm cool, as long as it makes sense. Because you have to realize when I'm working with the students, the first question is, what are your goals? What are your dreams? What's your target college? If the kid says to me, I want to go to Towson State, we develop a strategy for Towson State. If the kid says that they want to go to Spelman, we develop a strategy for Spelman. And those strategies are going to be very different because Towson, although it's a good school, it's not as selective as a Spelman. And the kid said he wants to go to an Ivy League school, that's fine. I have no problems with an Ivy League school. But if the kid says he wants to go to an Ivy League school or a Stanford versus the University of Delaware, then the plan has to be different. My job is to help her realize her dreams and help him realize his dreams. Okay, so academic requirements. Keep in mind that colleges do not require AP exams. that require AP courses. However, if your student wants to challenge himself or herself, I do encourage them to take AP classes if they're offered. If they're not offered, do not worry. A college cannot hold a student accountable for what is not offered at her school. But they can hold her accountable if there's something offered at her school and she doesn't challenge herself and take advantage of that opportunity. We've already mentioned earlier that GW is test optional. I didn't mention subject tests. Subject tests, how many people are familiar with subject tests? Okay, when I was a young man, they used to call them achievement tests, but now they're called subject tests. Those are tests in every academic area: English, math, chemistry, biology, foreign languages, U.S. history, world history. And the reason why they're important, audience, is because there are some competitive colleges that require 2 to 3 subject tests. However, not all competitive colleges require subject tests.
How many of you know what May 1 is? Okay. So May 1 is National Deposit Deadline Day. So that is the day where you have to pay your enrollment fee and let colleges know whether or not you're planning on enrolling for the fall. And so this kind of dovetails into this waitlist scenario that Dr. Azeze mentioned. So all schools admit students, but they admit their best and the brightest from the applicant pool that they have. And then there's a group of students who they're like, you are strong, you are talented, but we want to see more, or we're just not sure if you are ready to be in the actual class as of yet. So they'll put them on the wait list. And so what happens generally with the wait list is that a student has to respond and let the colleges know that they would like to remain on the wait list. So they can say, yes, I would like to stay on the wait list for your school, or no, I do not want to stay on the wait list. And depending on the schools, they may have a ranking order to their wait list, or they may just have a bunch of students on the wait list in no preferential order, or they may have a wait list based on academic interest. So if a student is interested in engineering, in English, in physics, or in one of those subject areas, they have a wait list per that subject area. And then they have, their schools will start to go to the wait list around May 15th, because after May 1, between May 1 and May 15th, that's when the dust clears. So all the students who have indicated that they would like to attend the school have already made that decision between May 1 and May 15th, and everything that needs to be cleared, whether it's checks, whether it's enrollment processes, all of that should clear within a 2-week window. If a university looks at that window on May 15th and said, wow, you know, we didn't get the deposits we were anticipating in a particular subject area, or we didn't get the deposits we were anticipating overall, that's when they go to the wait list. And depending on how they're ranking their wait list, it can go whether from top to bottom, or they just randomly select students, or it goes by a particular major. Now, being on the wait list doesn't mean that the school doesn't want you. Students get the wait list and they're like, nah man, they don't want me, so I'm not gonna go. But that's not necessarily the case with the wait list. It just means that there's a lot of talent in that pool, and they want a spot for you, but they want to make sure that, you know, the students who they're selecting first have the opportunity to enroll, and if they're under-enrolled, that's when they'll go to the wait list. A number of schools have gone to the wait list in the past and taken off some great students from off of that and admit them directly into the school. So if your student ends up on a wait list and it's a school that they're really passionate about, really interested in, I would suggest a few strategies. One, definitely call the admissions office and let them know that you are interested in staying on the wait list. Two, if the student has additional information, such as, you know, they've gotten a 4.0 in a quarter, or, you know, there's a new recommendation letter, or they were awarded a special talent or something along those lines, definitely let the admissions officers know, because a lot happens in a student's academic career between when the decision is made in January and when it's time for them to graduate or look at the wait list in May. So provide the schools with all that information and keep in contact, keep in touch. Let the schools know that you are interested in attending the school, and then if they do go to the wait list, the ones who bark the loudest will probably get picked the first. So that's pretty much how the wait list scenario works.
On May 1st, they will know whether they have reached their target. We call that a yield. If the yield is 100%, that's great. It means that everyone that they admitted, that they're, out of the people that they admitted, 100% accepted them. Students think of interviews as putting on a certain type of dress, going and sitting in front of somebody and having a formal interview. Indeed, that is one interview. But when a college admissions officer visits your school, that admissions officer is making an impression. When your students go to the NACAC College Fair, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, that's our professional organization. We have a big college fair, and these college fairs, they tour the country. The college fair with which Sanjay and I are involved is at the Washington Convention Center. When your student goes and speaks to a rep at a particular admissions officer's booth, they are making an impression. The admissions officer is making an impression of that student. I like to ask the student to ask the admissions officer for a card, for his or her business card, and I think it's important if the student is interested in that university to follow up with the admissions officer, indicating that he enjoyed speaking with the admissions officer. He looks forward to communicating with him regarding his application.